They are the world's largest hotel company and yet own no hotels. It took them just 10 years to generate the same amount of revenues it took Hilton 100 years to generate. They currently are worth over $80 billion. This is the business of Airbnb. Now, many people have heard of Airbnb and probably have booked on the site as well. But today, we're going to talk about the business of Airbnb. How do they make money? And how good of a quality of a business is it? Airbnb, as you probably know, is one of the leaders in the alternative accommodation segment. What that segment is any room booking, basically, that is not a hotel or motel. And so that includes everything from full homes to also just sharing individual rooms, which of course is something that they actually pioneered. Now, the idea of renting out someone's home has been around for a long time, but they took that idea and really expanded it, growing the market to not just full homes, but also apartments and even individual rooms and actually also individual beds. This is the idea of home sharing that they created. Now, their business model is pretty simple. They allow hosts to go to their website and take photos of their place and list it online. The host is able to charge whatever they want for their place. But there is a kicker. Currently, Airbnb has over 8 million listings on their site. And so people have a lot of choice to choose from, making it competitive. And so hosts will want to charge a fair price. Now, Airbnb makes money because they take 3% of the transaction from the host side and then lays on anywhere from a 6 to 12% transaction fee on the guest side. And so together, that usually comes out to about 14%. And so every time someone books a room on Airbnb, let's say they buy 2 rooms on Airbnb for $200 a night, Airbnb books $400 in what's called gross booking value. Now, that is the total value of the transaction. Now, if there's cleaning fees, which you sometimes see, those get layered on top as well. For simple math, though, let us ignore that. So you have $400 in gross booking value, and Airbnb will take 3% from the host side and tack on, let's say, 10% on average from the guest side. So they are making off of this transaction 13% of $400, which is $52. That is their revenue. And so when you're looking at Airbnb, there's these 2 very important metrics to look for. One is gross booking value. That is the value of all of the transactions on their platform. And today, that stands at roughly $85 billion. That is a figure that is global. Their revenues, though, are just a little over $11 billion because, again, most of that money ends up getting sent to the host and they only take a portion of it. And so while they help generate $85 billion in transactions, their revenues are a little over $11 billion. And that is how they make money. But is it a good business? Is it a defensible business? Are they growing? What are the growth opportunities? So let us get into it. Airbnb is a consumer-facing company. And so their advantage lies in the fact that a lot of consumers recognize who they are and trust their brand. In fact, 90% of all traffic to their website is organic. This is in contrast to competitors like Booking.com, Expedia, who commonly actually have to pay for a lot of their traffic. That is because when you go and search, let's say hotel room in Milan, you don't actually care if you're booking it on Booking or Expedia. However, when you're thinking home sharing, in fact, you don't even think home sharing, you think Airbnb. And it is an entirely different experience than a hotel. And so when you think Airbnb, you only want to go to Airbnb. Very few people ever think, let me go to Google and type in home sharing Milan apartment. You just don't do that. And so instead, you start your search with Airbnb. What that means is that they're able to spend a lot less money on marketing. It also means that they have a direct consumer relationship. Whereas in contrast, Booking, one of their competitors, who's one of the largest hotel bookings companies around, actually generates twice as much in gross booking value as Airbnb at a little over $160 billion, spends tens of billions of dollars on Google search ads. That is because people do not go to their site organically, and so they have to buy that traffic. Now, that does present a unique risk to their business model, but because they are able to buy that traffic profitably, it actually isn't a problem economically for them. But let us get back to Airbnb. Now, the direct traffic advantage is a big thing for Airbnb. They also benefit from what are called network effects. What that basically means is that the more people that are on a network, the more valuable that network becomes to everyone. And so they currently have over 8 million listings on Airbnb. That makes it much more valuable for users to browse there because they're much more likely to find a place to stay and they have a lot of options to pick from. On the host side, they benefit from the fact that there's a lot of people that book on Airbnb. And so over time, this sort of network effect just continues to compound on itself. Because as a host, don't you want to list on the place that has the most people, so you're most likely to book out your place for the most nights, thus making the most money? Of course. And then if you're a guest, don't you want the most selection? Of course. And so because of this, the big tend to get bigger. And that is one of Airbnb's biggest advantages, is in this network effect. They also have a benefit in being a very focused business that is very closely associated with just a single service and product. As a result of that, people literally have turned Airbnb into a verb. People don't even think to look to competitors very often. This is a very good competitive position for them to be in. Now, in terms of business economics and profitability, I mentioned that they have this benefit of not having to advertise a lot. They have a second huge benefit, and that is that they don't own any properties. All of the properties are purchased by the host, and they simply take a fee for booking the transaction. And so they are basically what is called a marketplace. They're really not a lot different from eBay or Amazon in that all they are is helping people sell stuff. And so the beautiful thing in their business model is that they don't effectively have to own what they are selling. And so as a result of that, they have very high gross margins, near 80%. Now, their profitability has swung back and forth historically, but that is for two reasons. One, prior to 2019, as CEO Brian Chesky would admit, it was not a very well-run company in terms of expense efficiency. And so they had a lot of redundant departments that they had to cut. And after the pandemic, when they not only cut a lot of these redundant departments, but also rationalized the workforce, they came out a much more profitable company. In fact, their free cash flow swung from negative $2 billion to positive over $2 billion. And today, their earnings, operating GAAP profitability, so these are not numbers that we are messing with, these are GAAP numbers, their operating earnings are around $2.5 billion. And so they're starting to show real operating leverage on the business. However, they have much further to grow, but they are continuing to invest back into the business in the form of research and development. Now, there's three sort of growth opportunities they have talked about that they are investing in. The short-term growth opportunity they talked about is continuing to work on their core business. Their core business is booking Airbnbs in their 5 main markets, which are United States, the UK, Australia, Canada, and France. Those 5 markets are where they have the most penetration, although the United States is by far their biggest, with about 45% of their revenues coming from the US. So right now, what they've been doing for the past couple of years have been looking at all of these customer pain points and really trying to address them. One of the most common one was all of these fees that would show up at the end of checkout. And so what they've done to address that is create a toggle so you can see the pricing up front before you even click into the listing. And in addition to that, they rolled out a price comparison tool for host so they could see whether or not they're competitively priced or not. And that actually helps drive prices lower down. And now another common complaint is the lack of reliability and consistency of an Airbnb. In fact, CEO Brian Chesky always says that for every 9 rooms someone books in a hotel, they book only 1 Airbnb. If we could just get that 1 to a 2, we will have doubled our sales. And the key thing he sees is preventing them from that is the fact that a lot of people have inconsistent experiences on Airbnb. With a hotel, you almost always know exactly what you're getting. However, with an Airbnb, there's always a risk of a bad experience. And so to address this, they've rolled out guest favorites and superstar host. These sort of badges help boost these rankings up in the search engine result page page when a user is searching. And if they're booking one of these guest favorite Airbnbs, they have much higher confidence in knowing that this is actually going to be a good experience. And they believe that is going to help them increase transactions in their core markets. Now, the second growth vector is international growth. There are many countries that know Airbnb, but are just not that penetrated as they are in the US. In Asia, they're focused on China, Japan, Korea, and India. In Europe, they're focused on Italy, Spain, and Germany. And then in South America, they're focused on Mexico and Brazil. All of these countries, they believe, have the potential to have the same level of adoption as they have in their core markets. But the thing is, they have to sort of localize the product to each market. And so they are working on doing that. To give you an example, Brazil was a country that they were growing somewhat slowly in and recently really reinvigorated growth. What changed? They rolled out a new payment option called Pix, which is a payment native to Brazilians. And so once they had that payment option, many more people booked transactions on their platform. This is what is called sort of localizing a product to the market. And it is a very important aspect of international growth. Today, their core markets are 75% of bookings. But all of these other countries I've mentioned have way more people in them than their core markets. And so theoretically, that part of the business over time should be even bigger than their current core markets. And so that is their second term growth vector, international growth. Now, this third long-term growth vector is a little more speculative. What it is a couple things. The first is experiences. Experiences is a product they've been teasing. They rolled it out a few years ago. It kind of flopped. Then they pulled back on it because it was COVID. And now they are ready to roll back out on it again. Actually, in early summer, they are going to be relaunching experiences. What this is the same way that you can book a room with a local host in various different cities. You will be able to book a local activity with someone across the world. So instead of being stuck in these mass market produced tours where you're following someone with an umbrella, now instead you could go to a pasta making class with an Italian grandmother, or have a passionate art student show you around the city. There are all sorts of different experiences that people can offer. And these are much more sort of unique and idiosyncratic ways to explore a city. Now, the second aspect to this, though, if you think about it, is, well, why would you only be able to do these local activities when you travel? And you only travel a couple weeks a year and you're in your own city for most of the year. Why couldn't you do these local activities then? That is the second aspect of this, which is a little more speculative, but very plausible too. If you live in Los Angeles and there's surf classes, why would it only be for a traveler? Anyone can go. Same with perhaps a cooking class or an exercise class. There's all sorts of experiences that people can offer on this marketplace. And this is actually what Brian Chesky said. When you're building a platform like this, there's no reason why you should build it to only sell one thing. When Amazon built their infrastructure, they didn't build it to just sell books. They built it to sell everything. And so that is the most speculative aspect of what could happen with Airbnb. They could use this sort of experiences platform to expand out to all sorts of different services. And so what that could look like at its most extreme is them selling stuff that have nothing to do with housing or Airbnb. And you could kind of see how they could get started with this. One of the things missing from Airbnb is room service. When you go to a hotel, it's just expected that there's room service. But Airbnb, of course, lacks that. But how do you offer room service to over 8 million different listings? Well, you create another marketplace. And so if they had a marketplace for cleaners who can go and basically be room service for all these different Airbnbs, that could be a pretty popular thing with Airbnbers and hosts. However, once you have a cleaning marketplace, there's no reason why it can only be when you're in an Airbnb that you're booking them. Maybe you want to book a cleaner for your apartment or house. And so that is a way that this sort of marketplace could start to spin up, and you could see it expanding beyond just Airbnb. The same is true with perhaps you want an interior designer to make your Airbnb look better so that you can book more nights. Well, that same interior designer doesn't need to work just on Airbnbs. The same can be true for a plumber or any sort of home repair or renovation. And, hotels, they very often have spas, and so maybe masseuses join the marketplace. But then again, they can offer their services to people who are also not staying at Airbnbs. And so there's all sorts of different verticals they could potentially attack. They actually talked about launching multiple billion-dollar businesses a year. However, as an investor, it is your job to be adequately conservative with the assumptions you are making. And so for many people, this will be too speculative, but it is still a sort of call option, a potential source of return that could help really make a lot of shareholder value if they're successful with it. And so this is an overview of Airbnb, the business model today. If you have any questions on them, go ahead and drop them below and we could talk about it in future videos. And if you like content like this, please go ahead and hit like and subscribe so we know to make more videos like this in the future.